Hello and welcome to the first talk. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Ian. I am an accessibility specialist and I help to run the conference too. Each time we always kick things off with a news update. So a little highlights reel of some of the nice progress made in the 6 months since the last edition of the conference. I am going to be covering a lot in this talk, but don't feel like you need to take notes or go away and Google any of it while you're watching, because at the end, I'm going to give you a link to a document. That document has links through to more information about every single thing that I mention. I am going to run through a few different things today. Progress made in hardware, progress made in resources for both developers and for gamers, progress in games and how that is being recognised in awards, and also I'm going to talk a bit about people. So first up, hardware. Xbox and PlayStation have continued to make progress on both of their consoles. The PS5 operating system has recently gained 6 new screen reader languages. It's also gained a system-wide mono audio toggle. That's for people with unilateral hearing loss. It's also gained an early preview version of voice commands for common tasks, and also an upgrade for greater visibility of which settings are enabled. And the Xbox operating system has gained the ability to mute individual classes of system UI sounds, and also the ability to assign accessibility shortcuts as part of the system remapping. So that means that you can assign things like toggling narration or magnification onto specific presses, like, for example, double tapping the share button. Microsoft had a hardware launch too. I know I mentioned this at the last conference, but it has now actually hit the market. This is the Surface Adaptive Kit. It's a set of tactile bump labels, keycaps, and port labels, together with some add-ons that make manipulating laptop lids and stands easier. It's something that builds upon the great work that was done on and the learnings from both the Xbox Series X and the adaptive controller, and it will make a tremendous difference to the experience of many gamers. It is a lovely, elegant, simple idea, but the thing I like most about it is the price. So this retails for $15. It's pretty rare to find assistive tech solutions that are so affordable. Over in Nintendo Land, there has been a substantial upgrade for the Hori Flex. This is a similar type of device to the Xbox adaptive controller, but for the Nintendo Switch. So this is a way to let gamers assemble their own custom control setups. There are a few ways in which the Hori Flex is actually more powerful than the adaptive controller, but an area that it has so far been really far behind on is the range of devices that it supports. But this is now changing. So just a couple of weeks ago, the Flex had a firmware update that enabled compatibility with a much wider range of joysticks. This means that many more hardware accessibility options have now been made available to Nintendo Switch gamers. Elsewhere, Elgato released their Stream Deck pedal, which is a set of 3 foot-operated pedals that you can map whatever you want to. This was actually designed to enable hands-free controls of your streaming software, but it was quickly jumped on for accessibility too, for obvious reasons. This isn't the first example of a device like this, not by a long shot, but it is a lovely illustration of how often and how well the needs of different groups can overlap. "3D printing has been having a bit of a moment too, with things like the Berkey 23 controller from the Netherlands, through to this. What you're looking at here is a contest to design snap-on controller mods. This contest resulted in 117 designs, all of them aimed at ways to non-destructively modify controllers for greater accessibility. And the designs are all freely available. They can all be downloaded and printed for free from printables.com. The contest was organised by a gentleman called Caleb Craft, who runs an initiative called the Controller Project. They do fantastic work, but it is hard for them to keep up with demand. They need help. Usually this is individual volunteers printing and shipping mods like this, but they actually put out a call recently looking for more help, looking for industry partners to help them reach more gamers. So if that sounds like something like you or your company might be interested in, please drop Caleb a line. So next is resources for developers. And I'm going to start with some data, and it is a landmark piece of data, in fact. So every year, GDC put out a state of the industry survey. This is a survey that's given out to developers, and the data is passed back to developers as well. And as part of this survey, they have a question in there that asks developers whether they are considering accessibility. So this was last year's result. 31% of developers said yes, they are implementing accessibility measures in their current game. 42% said no. 27% didn't know. So that might sound strange that people don't know, but this is like the people working in big companies. You can't say with 100% certainty what everyone else in the company is working on. And this is the result for 2022. 39% yes, 36% no. This is the first time ever that yes has surpassed no. The first time ever that more devs have said that they were considering accessibility than said that they weren't. Now, I don't want to sugarcoat this too much. 39% is still obviously a very, very long way from where we need to be. But we still need to celebrate the progress and celebrate the milestones along the way. And this is a big one. And there have been a few other interesting bits of data recently. One in particular that I'd like to mention is some data shared by Riot. They shared it recently, but it's actually about something they did a couple of years back. They implemented some settings into League of Legends to let players tweak the visuals. And they did this specifically for accessibility. It was for people with vision loss who were finding it hard to distinguish important things in the gameplay. They tracked the usage data, and this feature set had an adoption rate that was 10 times higher than they expected. 10 times as many people were using it than they thought would. And that is a really staggering number. But that isn't the interesting thing in itself. Where it gets interesting is that there were very clear trends in the data. The data was actually split along geographical lines. The regions with the highest usage data were those regions where older, worn-out hardware was much more common, and where the game is primarily played in cybercafes, where you don't have the ability to tinker with the display settings or have any control over the layout and the lighting in the room. So this is a very powerful example of that principle of design for one, solve for many, of how designing for a permanent physical impairment can also benefit a wide range of people with temporary and situational impairments too. Data aside, we've had some new informational resources too. One from the IGDA, who published an inclusivity white paper that included extensive information on accessibility. This is a big deal because accessibility is all too often still left out of the broader inclusivity discourse. Disability too often doesn't have a seat at the table. And also a resource that has made a huge splash from Microsoft, and this is the Gaming Accessibility Fundamentals Learning Path. This is a modular training course that is split across about half a day's worth of content. It covers introductory concepts and how to work directly with the disabled community, the assistive technology landscape, and also dives into best practices for games, for platforms, and for gaming hardware itself. This is a truly incredible resource. It has been localized into many languages, and it is completely free. So if you're looking for an easy way to upgrade your team's knowledge, this is a great start. And a huge shout out to Caitlin Jones, who is pictured here. She was the driving force behind it. It has been a monumental piece of work to put this together, and it is already having significant impact across the industry. We've also had an improvement of accessibility of developer resources, with captioning across Unreal's informational and educational output receiving a huge upgrade, which means it's time for another shout out, this time to Courtney Craven, who many of you will know as one of the founders of the Can I Play That game accessibility review site. Unreal have actually now hired Courtney as their full-time in-house dedicated captioning manager. So this progress that's happening at Unreal is not happening by accident. And one last thing while we're on the topic of engines, and that is ReadSpeaker. ReadSpeaker is the text-to-speech solution that was used to create the menu narration for The Last of Us 2. Back then, when it's being used for The Last of Us 2, it was all pre-rendered. It was all audio files that were saved out and shipped as part of the game deliverable. But they have been beavering away since then, turning it into a real-time runtime solution in the form of an engine plugin for both Unity and Unreal. And that has just shipped. It's shipped with some initial cross-platform support too, and that cross-platform support is going to grow further in the future. So that's some new resources for developers. The flip side of that is resources for gamers. So we will start with this one. This is a new accessibility portal on the PlayStation website. It is a central hub for information on accessibility of the consoles and also of the first-party PlayStation games too. It has overview videos, how-to guides, feature breakdowns, and also a bunch of really lovely quotes from across senior management, like this one from Jim Ryan, who is the CEO of SIE. At Sony Interactive Entertainment, we strive to build a future for players of all abilities. We use technology to advance accessibility tools, products and services for our PlayStation community, and to guide our mission to connect the world through the power of play. I love that quote. It's not just a great and meaningful sentiment, but also that interplay between the overall corporate objectives and the accessibility mission is something that you're going to be hearing more about in Gareth's talk on policy. Also, the ability to find accessibility information has come on leaps and bounds. Xbox and PlayStation have both established permanent accessibility showcases in their respective stores. So these are editorialized collections of games that PlayStation and Xbox think have done a good job of accessibility. Also, the Can I Play That website I mentioned earlier, they've actually built a database of the accessibility contact information for all the various different publishers and studios, and have linked that directly to every one of their reviews. The Accessible Games database from Dagaz has launched. That lets people search for games based on what features each game has. And last, but by no means least, the Xbox Store also launched their own accessibility tagging system. So this is a dedicated space for developers to include accessibility information right at the point of sale in the storefront. And that ties directly into Dorian's talk, which is later on today. And more studios have been making greater efforts to publicize their accessibility work, and more have been doing it earlier in development too. And that is critical. It's hard to get in on the hype about a game if you don't even know whether you're going to be able to play it. Part of that hype is the marketing media itself, and accessibility of that marketing media has been improving, with more developers making use of alt text for images like in social media, and progress on accessibility of marketing videos too, through audio description. Audio description is an extra narration track that is used to describe what's happening visually for people who have difficulty seeing it. So this is something that has been spreading over the past year or two, and it's now spreading further to videos for games like Halo Infinity, Star Wars Eclipse, and Hearthstone. So Star Wars Eclipse, that is pretty early in development, and they are already considering accessibility of their marketing materials. But that last one, Hearthstone, that is really cool to see because of how it came about. So last year, a developer made a mod for Hearthstone to make the UI accessible to blind gamers, making it accessible to screen readers. And UI is what Hearthstone is. So through making the UI accessible, the game is actually now playable by people who are completely blind. Now, I don't want to give the impression that this is good practice. It is not. This kind of blind accessibility is something that studios need to implement themselves rather than modders having to try to hack it in. But nevertheless, the modders did, and it is wildly popular with blind gamers. This was like Game of the Year for blind gamers on the audio games forums. And Blizzard noticed. So Blizzard now know that they have a blind player base, and they value those players equally. They want their blind players to be able to be just as excited about the next update to the game as everybody else is. And actually, one last note on audio description. So far, audio description's use in the games industry has been limited to trailers. But in the last couple of months, there was public confirmation that there are multiple companies working on integrating it directly into games for things like cutscenes. So if you want to keep pace with the competition, audio description is something you need to be looking into. Which brings me neatly on to progress in games themselves. At the moment, we are still in the aftermath period from The Last of Us 2. The Last of Us 2 hugely influenced lots of other developers, but it's still going to take a little while longer for the impact of that on those other studios to be fully felt in games that are reaching release. But that momentum that has been building in AAAs over the past couple of years has continued to build. In the past 6 months, we've seen lots of really lovely things in the AAA space through games like Halo Infinite, Forza Horizon 5, Guardians of the Galaxy, Dark Pictures, Horizon Forbidden West, and LEGO Star Wars Skywalker Saga. And not just wider spread of the basics either, lots of great innovation happening too. From the way that Guardians of the Galaxy handles its NPC captioning, all the way through to Forza providing sign language interpretation for its cutscenes. So it really is at the point now where you simply cannot release a AAA game without having a solid accessibility foundation. You just cannot afford to be that far behind what all of your contemporaries and competitors are doing. Player expectations have now shifted too far, and with the kinds of things that are in development today, that shift is only going to increase further. And indies have been doing fantastic things too. The number of indies thinking about accessibility has grown further, and so too has grown the breadth and the depth of their considerations. Just a few indie games that I'd recommend checking out for their accessibility efforts are Unpacking, Conway Disappearance at Dali View, the Easy to Play Games collection of 22 one-button Switch accessible games, Hop Legs, Dextram, Shieldmaid MX, Sifu, Nuclear Blaze, Grapple Dog, and Young Souls. And don't worry, remember I am going to give you a link to all of these, plus loads more at the end of the talk. And there have been tons of games patching in accessibility improvements too, like Senua's Sacrifice, Power Wash Simulator, Grounded, Fortnite, God of War, covering everything from text-to-speech improvements to control options, from gyro aim to this fun example from World of Warcraft. This is a NPC on board a train who is feeling queasy from the motion of the train. If you talk to him, he will give you a potion. You drink that potion, that disables the moving backgrounds outside the train that you can see at the bottom left. So what this is actually a simple toggle for turning off that simulation sickness trigger, but just implemented in a playful way that's actually a direct part of the gameplay. So with these patches, you can see that even though it's always better to think about accessibility early, and there is never a point at which it's too early to consider accessibility, it's also never too late. And there'll be a great talk on that exact topic tomorrow from Carrie Waterton. And this progress that's being made in games is being noticed. It's being noticed by players, and it's also being noticed by peers. The past year or two's explosion in accessibility awards has continued, both in the return of existing ceremonies and categories, to the addition of new ones, like the new accessibility category in the Trophy Room Awards. Forza Horizon picked up a load, including winning the accessibility category at the Game Awards, which if you've seen Tyra Ugly Crying, you will know. But it certainly hasn't been all about Forza. There have been lots of wins for others too, like Ratchet and Clank, Unpacking, Ghost of Tsushima, The Veil, Guardians of the Galaxy, Life is Strange, Far Cry 6, Halo Infinite, Before Your Eyes. There's so many developers doing so many great things now, and it's lovely to see them getting recognition for that. And ultimately, these awards are for the people who have done the work, who have made all of these great things happen, who are pushing the boundaries, learning these new things, and sharing them with the rest of us to drive the industry forwards. And part of that is the continued growth of accessibility as a discipline, the creation of ever more dedicated accessibility roles. The mugshots that you are looking at here are some of the people who have started in new full-time in-house game accessibility roles in the past 6 months, and that's pushed the total of people working in those dedicated roles up now past 50 across the industry. So working directly at studios and publishers, we have Elizabeth White at Bethesda, Pete Galbraith at Alchemy Labs, Noemi Rebelli Zabo at Amazon, Carrie Waterton at Rebellion, Michelle Gartzer at Gearbox, Stacey Jenkins at Ubisoft, and Andre Lang, who is also at Ubisoft. And there are other roles that are in the final stages of recruitment too at Naughty Dog, a couple at EA, and also at Activision Blizzard. And also some hires for platforms and tools, with Brian Parsons now working full-time on accessibility for the PlayStation operating system. Courtney Craven, as I mentioned earlier, now captions manager for Unreal. And Julia Pediguero as lead developer for Unity's new accessibility team. And that team has several other vacancies currently advertised. There is now really rapid acceleration in hiring. Before the end of 21, there had never been multiple roles advertised at the same time. I mean, a couple of years before that, there had never even been a role advertised at all. But all of a sudden, at the end of 2021, there were simultaneous vacancies advertised at EA, Ubisoft, Blizzard, Unity, and Naughty Dog. Sounds awesome, right? It is awesome, but it presents a problem, a skills shortage. Experienced people are very quickly being snapped up. The demand is now outstripping supply. So I am going to end this talk with a call to action. If you've been thinking about creating a role at your company, do it. The longer you leave it, the more people will be snapped up. And that person, you know who I'm talking about, who you rely on so much, who has been doing awesome accessibility things alongside their regular day job, they might not stick around to wait for it to be made into a proper accessibility role if there are opportunities elsewhere. And the other side of the coin, if you're an accessibility part-timer who would like to go full-time, there are opportunities. If you've been consulting externally and want to move in-house, there are opportunities. And even if you don't have specific game accessibility experience, there are opportunities. Because while a company's first hire needs to be someone with solid game accessibility experience, the successive hires often don't. Some of the accessibility roles recently advertised include program manager, software engineer, web accessibility, project manager. These are roles open to people from other industries too, and the games industry could really benefit from the diverse experiences you glean from other industries that are further along in their accessibility journeys. So make use of this conference. Even though we aren't together in person, the Discord is still a great place to make connections. There's a channel called Business. That is a place specifically set aside for people to advertise themselves, their services, and also their vacancies. So please, give me a headache. I want to see you up here in the next news update. I want you to make it even harder for me to fit the faces on the slide next time. And finally, that document that I promised that has links to everything that I mentioned in the talk, plus a bunch of other nice games too, is at tinyurl.com/gaconf-april22. That is all in lowercase, all one word. And on that note, thank you, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the event.